So today I'm going to cover some additional options that were not required of you, but some of them were offered as extra credit, so I did feel like I needed to cover them. So it's good to, keep an eye on how you may want to output files once you're finished designing something. So one of the options that you had was to produce a printed portfolio. Some of you have already done so. They came out very nicely, but every computer is going to have different printing profiles based upon what the needs of that particular print are. So as with any other software you print, file print would be where you would go. And typically, in a PC or a Mac, you're going to get this same sort of dialog box that should pop up if you're printing out of Photoshop. Things that you will want to keep in mind. The printer is referencing which printer you are connected to. My office printer in this case, I have two printer options that I have available to me. So whichever printer you want to be printing from is going to be which one you would need to select. Number of copies, obviously how many prints you would like. Layout. By default, it's usually in portrait mode, which is a vertical layout of the page. But in this instance, you can see that bits and pieces of my photo are getting cropped out. Like I've got this empty space over here between the rock and the page border that isn't even here. So in this instance, it would be more appropriate for me to switch from portrait to landscape to ensure that my entire image is printed on the page as it would need to be seen. Color handling. I recommend selecting that Photoshop manages the colors, and it will also let you pick a specific printer profile if you happen to have one that you need. I recommend if you're using a photo printer, pick either perceptual or relative colorimetric. These are going to be the two options that are going to give you the best end product in regards to photography type images. Saturation and absolute can be applied to other stuff such as graphics, but perceptual or relative colorimetric are going to be the two that you would probably want to use. I happen to use perceptual myself. Now, depending on which printer you have selected, you can see that when I changed it, it changed some of my settings there. But paper size is something that you will want to set. There are many different types of paper depending on the type of printer that you have. And that particular Epson printer that I selected can take anything from, a 3.5 by 5 or a 4 by 6, all the way up to a roll of paper that is 13 inches wide, and if it's a roll, it can go on forever. So it's important to make sure that whatever type of paper you're using, such as US letter, is going to be the one that you pick. Again, I'd like to reiterate, Macs versus PCs are going to have different secondary boxes, but this particular window should always be the same other than which printers you have available. There we go, print settings. It's important to recognize that the media type, the type of paper you're printing on, is very important. If you're using photo paper, you need to use photo paper. If you're using plain paper like computer paper, you would need to specify that. The reason that there are so many different options is because different paper surfaces require a different amount of ink to give you the same visual that you see on the screen. Glossy papers tend to require less ink. Matte papers, which don't have a gloss at all, tend to require more ink. So if you put in the wrong type of paper but have a different setting, you can end up with a visual that doesn't look the way that you'd expect it to. So it's important to make sure that whatever window you have, whatever it happens to say, you want to make sure the type of paper that you're using and the type of paper plugged into the media type is the same. type of paper. Print quality, best photos usually a good option. And you want to, if high speed is a checkbox that you have, you want to turn that off. The reason for that is you will tend to get banding, like a striping, where it is being printed out of your printer. You don't want to run into any sort of stripes because that does harm the quality of your image. Those are the major suggestions that I have. In the event that you are printing from home and you want to make sure that it comes out right before you waste a bunch of ink, one thing that I do like to recommend is doing a test print. And what that means is I'm going to adjust the size of my document so that I can test print and make sure that the colors are for the most part right, and there aren't any bands or any sort of printing errors by the printer itself. If you have a printer that tends to be streaky, this is one good reason why you might want to do a test print ahead of time. So I'll uncheck center, and right now it's scaled at 100% to my screen. If I were to change that to about 30%, you can see that it shrank the size of my document by 30% if it's original sizes. Now, at this point, I could click print, and it would print just a corner of my page. And this allows for me to check, make sure everything fits the way that it's supposed to. If it does, I can go back to 100 and print the full size. But in the event that something happened, this didn't come out the way that you want, at least you didn't waste a whole sheet of paper and a bunch of ink getting a result that you're not happy with. And the great thing about doing a test print is you can use this whole sheet to produce new test prints. So let's say the first run didn't come out right, but the second, you want to give it another test print, you've made some corrections to your machine. I'll take a look at these little border lines and I'll just scoot my picture down, and then I can do another test print and it'll print right next to the first one, and I can compare the two and make sure that it is moved in the correct direction that I want to go in regards to ensuring that the quality of my print is going to work right. Scale to fit media is great if you've already got a picture that fits on your page well. I will caution you though against doing that on an image that perhaps is too small, not the full size of the 8.5 by 11. An example of that, I have a photo here that if I wanted to have it printed, it wouldn't fit the whole page. If I click scale to print media, I'm stretching pixels. Chances are the print is not going to come out as good as the original image. On top of that, this is another reason why you want to make sure that you are working at the proper document size, because is it almost the size of the paper? Yes. Is it a great image size though in relation to print? No. So these are, again, it comes full circle. These are some of the reasons why I've had you work at a very specific file size all term in the event that you chose to print them out for a physical portfolio. This is one of those reasons why that is so important. Now, additionally, you may not decide to print your files, but perhaps they will show up later. Maybe you'd like to put them online or something like that. One of the nice things that Photoshop enables you to do, regardless of the size of your files, it allows for you to save specifically for web use. So while yes, you can go to File, Save As, and save it as a plethora of different file types based on what you might want to do, and you can determine whether or not you'd like it to keep your layers, there's a separate section called Save for Web. And what this allows for you to do is it lets you compare the quality of your file in relation to other types of file types. And this is one of my favorite ways to save for web because it's very efficient. Depending on your presets, you may have multiple images showing. I like to do the 4-up, which is where it shows you 4 separate examples. And the one in the upper left is always going to be the original. So this is your Photoshop document. This is in theory, the highest quality that you're going to get. But it lets you compress it and assess what's going to be the best option based on what it is that you want to do. So there are a couple different file types that you can deal with. The first one's the JPEG. We're all familiar with the JPEG. Digital cameras typically produce JPEGs. And these are great for photographs because you can incorporate millions of different colors into a specific area. Quality, you can either pick based on low, medium, high, very high, etc. And that will, of course, increase the size but also increase the image quality. There's also a slider where you can adjust the quality here. You can see that as I lower the quality, you can see I'm starting to see pixels. So I'd say depending on how big the image is going to be, medium is fine. Low would be fine if it's just going to be a thumbnail, like a very small crop. But if it's going to be something that's going to be large, then I would pick high. Maximum obviously is going to be 100, but you're going to wind up with the largest image size. Not quite as big as the PSD, but big for a photo. Another thing is you can determine how quickly it would download if you were on a website. So at a 56.6 kilobytes per second connection, it would, take a fair amount of seconds to load depending on what your connection is. So that gives you an idea of how someone's computer might handle that particular size file. I'll come down here and click again. Another option is a GIF or GIF, depending on who you talk to. A GIF is another image type, but it has a very limited color range. The maximum number of colors that it can show is 256 colors. So usually photographs don't look as great as they could on a GIF, because if you have any, I guess it's most noticeable in the clouds, you can see that there's starting to be some banding and it looks a little bit almost grainy. Let me adjust, lessen the number of colors. You can see it's starting to look really grainy in this area. So GIFs are nice because they support transparency, but one of the downsides of them is you don't get as much color range. But as a result, it tends to be a slightly smaller file type, depending on what type of JPEG you have. And it is great for graphics. So if you have an image that has a very limited number of colors, say maybe a logo of some kind, GIFs are great because it lets you narrow down the number of colors that it's using. You can see here the number of colors that are present versus the number of separate colors that are present. And one of the cool things is you can actually remove colors from the equation to try and lower your file size individually. But that becomes a little bit of a hassle. So unless you see like a bright red here that isn't present here, you don't have to worry about that. GIFs also provide animation options. So think a GIF animation that will loop on itself repeatedly forever. If you Google GIF animation, you'll know what I'm talking about if you're not sure. And that allows you to support that also. But there's also the PNG or PNG. Depending on the type of PNG, it may be very similar to a GIF, or it could be more similar to a JPEG in terms of the number of colors that it's allowed to have. But unlike the JPEG, the PNG also supports transparency regardless of using the PNG 8 or the PNG 24. So as long as the transparency button is checked, if there was a transparent region of this image, you would be able to use that online and the transparency would still show up the way that you would expect it to. But this is nice because you can actually compare, again, the file size of the original versus the different file types, and how long they would take to load based on the information that you plug in. One of the other nice things about saving for web is you can incorporate metadata in your image. And essentially what that means is if you took this image with a photo, it would include camera information by default. You can plug in a copyright notice saying this image is copyright, your name, and whatever year you like, just to kind of save your butt if you wanted to make sure that you retained creative rights to the work that you produce. You can even include contact information and include a website, an email, a phone number, whatever you like. So if someone finds an image, metadata is attached to every image that you put out there, and someone could right-click and receive the information of that image. A good example if I download an image off the internet, and this is the original background that was in the Stone PSD that I had open, I click on Get Info. If there's any metadata attached to this file, it'll include where it came from, and depending on the photographer or whoever attached information associated with it, it would also include copyright information. Once you've selected the image type that you are ready to use, all you would have to do is click Save. It would save it as the extension that you have selected. So if you'll notice how this particular box was the one that I clicked, it's got the blue border around it. When I clicked Save, it realizes that that's the JPEG. It's at 30% quality, and that would save wherever it is that I've asked it to save, which is very, very convenient. And there's my JPEG that I saved. So saving for web's very easy to do. It's also nice because you can protect your work by lowering the quality. If you're sharing it online, it prevents theft of your imagery online. Now, one other thing that is probably one of my favorite things to use for Photoshop are scripts. And essentially what a script is, or an action, which they're not interchangeable, but they are related. I've got the Actions panel open. If that's not open, you can go to Window, and Actions is right near the top. And essentially what an action is, it is a predetermined set of code, either in Photoshop, or you can produce your own actions if you'd like to on an image. So some of these, let's see, we'll do something simple like make an image look a certain way. So for an example, quadrant colors is really easy. I select the one that I want. If you take a look at it, it's got a bunch of different steps that it takes to change your image. So you click the action that you like. Down here at the bottom is a little triangle like a play button. You hit play. And now that Photoshop has thought through it, now we have the end product of the quadrant colors. So what that does is they are recorded history steps that you apply to another image. So it opened my picture, did a color balance, made a selection, did another color balance, made another selection, did another color balance, etc., until it gives me the end product. If I wanted to add a vignette, and you can see here it says selection in parentheses. So that means without making a selection, it's not going to do anything. So if I wanted to give it this image a vignette, which essentially is adding sort of like a feathered selection around an object, I'll make a selection and I'll click vignette, hit play, and all right. And you can see that it sort of cuts only a window out and applies a soft feathered edge. And if I hit undo, it lets me step back in my history. Others are really only built for specific things. So you can see this one pertains to a selection. Cast shadow and water reflection, apply to type. Let's try that. Here's a word, cast shadow, applies to type. Oops, went too far back in my history. There we go. Water reflection. Ripples it a little bit. So same idea. Some of them apply to certain things. Sepia toning applies to a layer. Let's see what that does. Just gives a sepia tint. So some of them are based on others. There's one here, this is one that I created, that saves images for web specifically. So it lets me adjust an image size. So the width would be no more than 400 pixels, and then it would save it down. So if you wanted to create a action specifically for a particular element. For instance, let's say I wanted to do a color correction to a series of images together and crop them to be a specific size. In order to create an action, first you need to create a new action, and you're going to name it. So I'll call this crop and color. Crop, shape, and color. I can set it, right now it's in the default actions folder, but I can assign a different folder to it if you'd like. I can also assign a function key to it if I want, or a color to make it stand out. When I have my name figured out, I'll click record. You can see the little record button is on. So this is going to be where I can make some adjustments to my shape. So we'll say I want to crop the photo here. You can see crop, and the movements have been recorded. I'll add in a custom shape. And it picks up all that information. I will rotate the shape a touch. Transform current path has been recorded. And I'll add hue and saturation adjustment layer. And we'll say I want to change the colors to that. And you can see my adjustment layer has been created as well. So when I'm finished, click stop. You can see that all of my steps have been recorded here. I could also save it, and saving it would be incorporated also. But now if I wanted to say, all right, I've got this picture over here. If I wanted to apply that particular action to it, I click play. It scaled it down, added, so cropped it, added a color, transformed the key, added a hue and saturation layer, and then modified it. Now you can see that the quality is not that great, but it also tried to retain the size and information that were in the other one. So there are a few tweaks that are worth adjusting. Not all of the actions are perfect. It takes a little getting used to. But you can create your own actions to give specific effects to some of your pictures. Come back to this picture real quick. Oh, scripts are other ways that you can alter or edit images. So as another example, similar to actions but not identical, let's say you wanted to resize a whole bunch of images all together. You can actually use a script to source an image folder. So let's say I had this folder, and when I'm done resizing them, I want to save it to a separate folder. I'll put a folder on my desktop. I want to save them all as PSDs. Maximize compatibility means it'll work on multiple versions of Photoshop. Resize to fit, I can have them fit a specific aspect ratio if I want to. And on top of it, I can have it run an action. So let's say I wanted to give each of them quadrant colors and copyright info. All right. When it's all said and done, I click run. It will open up every single one of these and do all of those steps. You can see Photoshop can't quite keep up with all of them. But this is a nice way to have Photoshop automate a bunch of different things for you at one time without you having to open up each image individually and make edits to it. So I think it's done. Close that. Open up my sample image. You can see each one of these pictures has its own settings now, but because I asked it to save it as a PSD also, it saved me both. Pretty nice. Quick and easy. One last thing in relation to web use that is super helpful is the slice tool. Now, if you've ever been to a website where there's lots of pictures, like perhaps a really big picture in the backdrop, but perhaps it loaded much faster than you'd expect it to because it was a good quality image, this is where the slice tool may have come into play. So it works kind of like a selection tool, but you can see that it cuts bits and pieces up into your image. And it lets you divide parts of your image into separate areas. So let's say, and I've made way too many slices, so let me back up. Every image starts off as a single slice, but as you add to it, it adds additional pieces. So let's say, oh, I can move it around. You can see that it will adjust how many slices are available. If I wanted to maybe make the heart its own link, perhaps, what I can do is I can draw a square around that heart. I'll grab the Slice Select tool and I'll click on that. So now each one of these slices is going to be saved as its own image file. So the reason that comes into play with web use is, should this image need to load as one unit, rather than having sort of the slow load where it slowly loads from the top down, each of these areas would be loaded as a separate item. so it speeds up the load time. So I can actually edit that area. So we'll say, I'll call it my heart. If I want it to go to a URL, when someone clicks on it, http://www.love.com, whatever. Leave target alone for right now. Message text, if you want someone to hover over it and spit out a message, you can do so. And it also gives you the dimensions. So I'll click OK. You can do that for every single slice. This is great if maybe you designed a website in Photoshop and even the navigation and the text and everything's laid out perfectly, but it's just a picture. You can do this to actually draw a box around every single navigation element that someone can interact with. So to save this, again, we'll save for web. I'll click save. You can see here, it's still saving it as a JPEG, but it's saving all slices. I'll click save. And there's a section that made its own folder called images. And if I come into it, it sees each of these parts. And if I were to load this into a web page, I would just have to load them in their order, and it would lay itself out the way that I'd like it to. So for those of you that might be coming into my web design class in the fall, this might be something that you could use later. But that's the quick and dirty of output in different formats for your images once you're done editing them the way you'd like to edit them. So it's been an awesome semester. So happy you guys have shared it with me. I'm really proud of the direction everyone's work has gone in, and I look forward to seeing some of you in the fall. Take care.